to be hosting a joint lecture this quarter between us and the Landscape Architecture Department of Cal Poly, a tradition that I hope we'll be able to continue, which is weird. Yes, James is clapping. Thank you, James. I just wanted to introduce Professor Rennie Tang from the Landscape Architecture Department, who will introduce our teacher.
Thank you. Hi. I think many of you know me from E&B 101, at least the first and second years. So hopefully this is a nice reunion for you first and second years students. Great to see all these landscape students here. This is also part of my 499 class, Material Realities. So that's kind of the origin of inviting the lecturers that we have here today. So today we have Seth Grizzle and Jonathan Junker from the design studio Graypants, and they come all the way from Seattle. They just arrived yesterday, and their practice is a combination of art, architecture, and product design. So they do all scales of work. I think they began their practice with something as simple as a light, and that expanded, and they recently completed their first architecture project, which they won a AIA Seattle Award of Honor for. So they're clearly doing really well. I just saw a photo of their studio in Seattle, which looks amazing. It's more of a warehouse, workshop. It would definitely make us all jealous. So these guys are from the Midwest, and then found their home in Seattle now, and maybe we'll go up to visit them at some point. And I'd love if you could talk about the name of your practice. I'm sure we're all curious where Graypants comes from. It sounds awesome. We'd love to hear the story. So I'll hand the floor over to Seth and Jonathan.
Thanks for having us.
I don't do this very often.
All right. We keep these things pretty casual. So feel free to chime in with questions whenever you need. Let us know if you can't hear us.
So we'll start, since there is the question, how did we get the name Graypants? John and I were roommates in college, and when we were trying to think of names to start our company, last name is Grizzle, John is Junker. We were over-designing, overthinking names, and we didn't want to be Grizzle Junker. And a friend of ours said, we used to have the same pair of gray pants in college. And they were like, well, we have the same damn pants. Why don't you just call it Graypants? So that's what we did. We have an unusual sort of model, we think, from a design perspective. As was mentioned earlier, we like to consider ourselves a conceptual design studio. Our background was in architecture, but we just went home and tinkered at night and wanted to play with stuff and just make stuff, which led to what started our company, which was products specifically within the lighting world, which has allowed us to expand into doing more custom installations within space and within different buildings, even public art, and then back to architecture. So we have this kind of thread of conceptual design that links all these three different sandboxes we like to call them that we play in.
We see a lot in here about it's a huge focus on our process and how we just approach projects, and we've always had this saying in our studio, dream, scribble, make.
Well, start you off with dreaming is kind of how we approach every single project. Is where you get your kind of like big ideas from, and what drives you, what gives you inspiration. And we look to nature a lot. You'll see some of these images. These are cross sections of sweet flag grass. This is DNA strands. Nature, so beehives. We love to go on hikes in Washington. We're really lucky to have amazing landscape to take advantage of. and just kind of being aware of our surroundings. This was our old studio space, our first studio space, where we had a friend paint this mural in the hall, so we felt like you were walking through a painting as you were ascending into the space.
One of the most amazing things about being from Seattle is that you're immersed in this urban environment, but you're only 10 minutes away from being at the top of a mountain or the ocean, and not dissimilar to what you guys have here.
So this image was literally, there's this beautiful building that was about to get torn down in Seattle, and they just kept getting pasted with like concert posters and all this kind of stuff. And one day I was walking across the street and somebody had just stapled this message that was just kind of blowing in the wind, and it looked like it was so temporary. It was such a sweet moment of time that I just felt so lucky to be a part of. And I just think like just being aware of your surroundings. There's so many things around us that are there, but if you don't stop to pause to see them, you could miss the message, or you could miss a source of inspiration that's around you. So it's a reminder to me of that. And this kind of ties into what started us and what started our process was we'd walk around and we'd just see stacks and stacks and stacks of cardboard in front of grocery stores, on street corners, and we eventually were just like, oh, I wonder if we can use this as something interesting to place.
That takes us to Scribble. These are just more images of inspiration and us having fun. This is us playing with photography and long captures of light. And one of the things we always try to do is inform our process with video, with photography, with sketching, with whatever it is. We just try as many different types of process as possible and try to enjoy it and have fun with it.
This is kind of an inside joke. When I was little, this was my headboard, and I used to chew on it. It was half beaver, I think. And I made up this little guy in the corner called Mr. Moneybags, and I drew him with my teeth just to say this scribbling can be actually anything outside of your hands too. Use your mouth if you choose. This is a friend of ours who, he's a theoretical mathematician, and he makes machines that draw on walls, and he gives them intelligence. So he had this one machine that was tracing movement, and this was a result of that, and just a bunch of lines, but there's so much depth and layering and process that goes into these things, and I just found it very beautiful.
This is one of my favorite images because it's, we actually hung this up in our old studio as a piece of artwork, but it's the first tabletop that we started making our scrap lights on. So our first product line, it was a clean white table when we started, and over the course of that first year, 2 years, whatever, it just developed this texture and this history that kind of told the story of what went into those lights and how many times we tested different shapes. And at some point we decided this thing is beautiful now, we should hang it up.
So this will take you into making, which is our fun process, where we take all the ideas and things that were coming up and kind of bring them into more of a three-dimensional space. As John mentioned earlier, we like to play with all sorts of different types of mediums to explore our work and to document our process. And this was one of the first things we did. This was in 2007. We entered this call that was for sustainable chairs, and we thought it was just a buzzword getting slapped around at the time. So we decided to challenge ourselves and submit a grouping of chairs that was made from trash, basically all the stuff that we could find around. We didn't have a lot of money at the time, and we wanted to turn these objects into something beautiful. So we found old boxes, old slip sheets that came in great containers from China, Strangers, which is a local newspaper in Seattle, and then scraps of plywood that we gathered from local contractors in the Sacred Forest. And we didn't have a wood shop at the time, but we had a bathroom. So this was my bathroom, and I taped up a plastic bubble on the inside, and we cut and sanded the chair into that. And
neighbors loved us.
Yeah, we're terrible neighbors. And this was the result from the bathroom. And you'll notice there's a layering process, I think, that we go through, and how our mind works out, just in thinking of three-dimensional objects, but thinking of slicing those up and somehow taking those layers and combining that to make a three-dimensional shape. And that's what led us to lights and how we started playing with cardboard. So we were using cardboard for this chair, And through that process, we decided to make lights to hang above the chairs because the gallery space had really, really tall ceilings. So chairs looked like doll furniture. They looked really small and unapproachable. So we decided to make lights from the scraps from the chairs to hang above them to make the chairs more approachable. And then this is really what led us into creating the lights and seeing how the texture was playing with the cardboard. And we wanted to expose the structural qualities of the cardboard and use that as the medium to diffuse the light. And it's the part that you don't see of cardboard, and we wanted to take that part and use that as an expression for a different type to abstract it into a way where you didn't recognize that it was actually a box anymore. So over the next several years, we grew this into an entire series of lights ranging from scale and size, and these are some images of projects that have used our lights around the world in fun installation ways. We've been really fortunate to be a part of that process.
A big part of the lights has been figuring out how to scale up production, but at the same time preserve the studio environment that we love. We're a small studio. There's 10 of us in Seattle. And we like to keep that kind of hands-on feel and those values that started the whole business. At the same time, we knew we needed to start experimenting with a lot more shapes and materials and things like that. So you'll see that we started to incorporate metal and glass and different textures, and it's kind of just a constant effort to keep developing an idea. We never really saw it as a finished project. It's still an ongoing project to this day. And this is what enabled the lights to be more commercial friendly, into restaurants, offices, spaces like that. This is Google's office. We've partnered with a lot of larger companies and have been able to do much bigger commercial projects with them as well.
One thing that really changed us, when we were working out of our old kind of work-live loft space, we could only get things out of the front door, which is about a 36-inch door. So when we changed our studio space, we moved and we had a loading dock. We could fit something that was 9 feet by 9 feet out of it. So it really changed the scale on which we could create and make things. We didn't really realize it at the time that we were so limited by just a door, but the fact that when we changed space and scale, we could really start thinking of larger objects. And one thing that happened for us is through our process, in the beginning, we were about 70%, I would say, efficient using an old box. And then the second we upscaled our lights, we became more around about 90% efficient with using the material. Just by thinking of it in a different way, by thinking bigger, we were allowed to be more efficient with smaller pieces, and that allowed us to kind of grow the lights and scale too.
These shots were taken in our studio in Seattle. This is the space that Rennie mentioned. We're really fortunate to be in this beautiful old wooden warehouse that used to build ships in, and it just has 100 years of history embedded within its walls.
One of our trade show booths in New York one year, just to show kind of some scale of the objects.
So they keep getting bigger. These are 86 inches in diameter, I think. This is a restaurant space in Texas. And now we're figuring out how to create these 10-foot diameter lights that can collapse for shipping and have integrated diffusers. And it also kind of leads into bigger relationships that we've used the lights to create with other companies. This is a good example of coming up with a custom solution for somebody else, where they're not just buying products off of us that we create, but actually looking to us to figure out something unique that they can have. This particular shape was for Starbucks and was inspired by kind of a twisted coffee bean.
What we did is we approached them. We came up with this idea where they could retrofit their stores and save money by not hiring an electrician, reusing electrical sockets, and we could design a shade that would fit into their existing components. So it was a win for them, and it was a win for us, and we could create a responsible solution to help them as they were basically remodeling a lot of their stores. It was just we called it a simple like little plug and play method that they could use to adapt.
And one of the most important things that this enabled was that growing relationship that we could start to begin doing custom work for them as well, not just these. I think these are now in over 1,000 Starbucks or so in North America and just starting to roll out in Europe.
Which takes us to, we don't only play with cardboard. Even though we do love it as a medium, we're not, we do a lot of other things than that, and we wanted to test ourselves with how do we become extremely efficient with one sheet of aluminum.
So this is another series of pendant fixtures. It's a single disc of recycled aluminum, and it was just a challenge, like Seth mentioned, of how do we take this one little piece and do something really great with it and be as efficient as absolutely possible.
So we decided to come up with a design that was literally from the package up, where the package became the jig on how the light was actually assembled. We got a lot of questions when we first started doing scrap lights. Are these collapsible? Can we save costs on shipping? But they came assembled. It was a kind of a craft-based project. And this, we wanted to challenge ourselves with how do we create an object that becomes really, really efficient to ship. So we designed it from the idea of the package becoming the tool to put the light together.
One of the greatest things are these little pixels, these notches that you see cut out of every ring. It sort of allows you to assemble and clip the whole light together with no fasteners, adhesives, glues, or anything like that. And the whole thing locks together, but also those little pixels create this beautiful pattern of light on the ceiling, the walls where you hang them.
So this goes next to a new series that we just launched last year, which was how do we become efficient with one sheet of material in the cardboard, and how can we take that and use that to adapt into other materials as well. So we came up through a competition that we did through the Danish Design Association, this idea of using a curve, and how do you take a flat sheet, but then you can use this old woodworking technique, which is a curve for a cut. You can make a flat sheet move and have movement and stretch and expand. So we came up with this concept where we have these simple wire frames that you can literally drape this across, and you can reverse it, so one side has color, one side has a different color, and you can kind of change its clothes over time. So we could have different materials that we introduce into this, or if you got tired of one color, you can flip it around. So just as we change our clothes and want to have the flexibility to do that, why won't our products have the same sort of idea of flexibility? So this was our diving into that as an expert.
And part of the idea behind them too is that it's an idea you can expand on continuously, so we can continue to play with materials and patterns and flat pack these sheets and start to offer replacement shades out of any materials that we want, different designs, and it's all kind of part of this system that can integrate with whatever frame it needs to. It can take on that shape, and you can really start to expand them to different sizes.
This goes into, actually our first idea wasn't in lights, it was with the chairs. I was living in DC at the time, I was in Seattle, just out of college. We wanted to enter this furniture design competition. And how do you, the trick was, there's so many chairs, so many objects in the world, how do you do something unique and different? So I did this little quick sketch and I sent it to John. I was like, why can't we have this like sliced chair that has movement in it, and we can have this piece that slides in and out to kind of create this dynamic relationship between like seating and chair, or seating and some kind of storage element. So this was the lounge version that we did of that, and just to show you how it kind of moves. But the problem was when we started to develop this, we made one of it, we didn't make it until 8 years later after we had the idea. But it was really inefficient to make, we were really wasteful with the material. So we didn't want to push that forward. We wanted to press pause on that and think how we could take that same design, but use it in a more efficient way. So then that's when we started playing with little models. And that's what this little video showed.
again, us having fun with our process. So little tiny models, and we just thought, you know, let's try to make this model in 4, 5, 6 different techniques and start playing with how they interact with each other and how they can slide together or interlock and how we can use the least amount of material. And we got carried away.
May or may not be SharePoint.
But what it did lead to was a super ultra efficient version of this plywood chair. So we have a final version of this in production now. And we get 4 of these chairs out of a single 4x8 sheet of plywood, and there's no way to accept the sawdust.
Just a simple process of efficiently laying out kind of a kit of parts on a sheet that nests completely together, and you're only generating waste from the curve, pretty much the CNC blade cutting it, and then yeah, this takes us into more of our custom work. So that was more on the product side of the things we're exploring, but this is more into custom projects, custom installations, which can lead us into more of a product side that's an excuse for us to do research and development and prototyping. So we were approached by Airbnb to make a huge cloud at their new headquarters in San Francisco. And we decided it would be fun to do that out of ping pong balls. So we decided to use 30,000 ping pong balls and make them an enormous cloud. It was about 12 feet by 7 feet by 4 feet that hangs in their lobby now. So it hangs out in the atrium, and we had to figure out how to work around all the seismic codes, and so it's actually even anchored to the floor. But it was a really fun thing to do.
It's a really interesting project because there are as many people looking down on this floating cloud as there are looking up at it. So we actually had to design it as a clamshell. Basically, it's a giant clamshell of ping pong balls that enclose this aluminum frame that's lit from within. So our prototype started as actually an LED-based cloud where each ball was individually lit, but it evolved into kind of this aluminum skeleton-based huge piece.
Goes next. This is, we've done several iterations of this next project, and it's about being inspired by these murmurations of birds, which create these really dynamic, they create these really dynamic three-dimensional shapes that are shifting and changing. And we thought it would be really interesting if we could create chandeliers based off of this concept. So we developed ways to almost like pixelate a shape that we were working on, and now we started using fiber optics to do that. And this, since we've done several of these now, we see that it could be a really interesting product. So now we're working on developing this as an actual product that we're going to roll into our line. But now we've just done several custom installations.
If you look up that particular bird online and watch a video of the starlings, you can see how these huge flocks they form kind of morph. They keep a cohesive shape, but they morph as they move through the sky. And our very first incarnation of this light was all about how does this morph in shape as you move around it. So we call it the Mobius loop light, this particular one.
The idea was we wanted to have an object where no matter where you were in the room, it felt different. It felt, each perspective, you had a unique experience with it. It wasn't the same from side to side, front to back. Really needed to walk around the object and be a part of the object, and it changed with you as you moved around the space.
This is a separate example of one, and what it's led to is development of currently a 60-foot long version of this light.
Yeah, so we're working on a concept for launching. This will show you how crazy we are. This was another competition that we ended up doing, and it was, the trick for the call was design an object that's smaller than bigger than a bag, but smaller than a room. So it was pretty open-ended. And we wanted to use that to tackle a huge problem. So we decided to make this crazy machine that would tackle the ocean gyres. And when we started researching this, there's the garbage patches that are floating in the oceans. And what happens is the UV rays from the sun break down the plastic into particles that can't be collected. But we learned in this process that they do carry a charge. So, for instance, the particles have a negative charge. If we had something that had a positive charge, you could attract the particles to that object, then you can collect it. But then, how you're in the middle of the ocean, what do you do with this? So, if this machine could turn it back into a ball, then it could get caught by the currents or the wind and blown out from the center. Because they get too small, you couldn't. So the idea was that we have this machine that turns into balls, and then you think of all these different scenarios. Okay, so it's going to wash up, in a third world country, in a second world, in a first world. But how do you? A lot of people don't have access to recycling. Luckily we do. But how can you take this idea and use it as a toy for a child, or could they cut it in half and use it as a bowl? Could you create a separate economy from these things, where instead of fishing, you could have someone harvest these, and then they can turn them back in to make a living wage. And then there's going to be a cute polar bear shot coming out. Just have to have that. And then this won't look like much, but this was the actual site for our first architecture project, which is this shitty garage. And the clients had this, unutilized space, but they fell in love. They actually had a Thanksgiving dinner in here at one point in time, and it was candlelit, and they fell in love with these walls on the inside. It's these beautiful texture of the walls that were boards that were used to pour the foundation from the house that were saved and made this garage. And so they came to us, and they wanted to be surprised, and they wanted to preserve a memory, literally, as they said. So how do you do that? So we were like, how do we do that? So we started thinking for a while, and we wanted to come up with a space that used the walls as a backdrop. And one of the clients was a poet, so we kind of came up with this idea that it should be design turned into poetry. And it just so happened that poem became everything that this space was about, and it's etched on the front door now. And it was about celebrating the things that you take for granted throughout your life. So turning on a light should be fun, I think. Going to bed should be fun. Opening a door should be fun. All the things you do every day, why can't those make you smile? Why can't you celebrate those moments?
There's such an important thing we've always talked about from day one, that it was so important to keep our hands on and do these chairs and these lights, and how that would influence our architecture, and how being architects would make us better at the lights, and it's a very symbiotic kind of hands-on relationship. And I think a lot of those things come through in the garage project.
And everything was about, so there's beds hidden in the floor, so you open up the floor, which reveals a bed, or it turns into a lounge. The front door is a bookshelf bar and a desk with a poem etched on it. There's an outdoor shower. The walls are this system that we developed. It's these fabric red panels with LEDs that are backlit with speakers, and you can control the whole thing from your phone. So you can really just dial it in and create whatever atmosphere you want to create. So at night, the object becomes this like glowing lantern in the landscape, not just an actual building itself, but the building itself can affect the surroundings and its natural landscape.
The bookshelf you see is the sliding cabinet that is the front door. It is a bookshelf, it is the mini bar, and it's kind of next to this beautiful 100-something-year-old stove that was found. So there's a really wonderful play of old and new. The old garage, every piece of it that was dismantled was preserved and remilled into the floors, into whatever we could use it for. So,
the idea was that this new space becomes a theater to watch the old decay around you. So you preserve these old walls, and by making the other walls glass, you use that as the background to still have the memory, you still have the memory of what was there. And then the rest of the space is just such a beautiful sight. You put any walls up, it's really gorgeous.
that takes us to a very different project. This is for Amazon. They hired us to be creative and sculptural with a 5,000 square foot ceiling in one of their new spaces in Seattle. they're expanding like crazy in the city and building 3 skyscrapers right now. So this is a pretty great space to be creative in, but we try to take a different approach to it. And instead of just doing a typical cluster of lighting or a ceiling system that you could buy, we thought, why don't we start playing with shades and actually give them more freedom to sculpt the ceiling with it and perform more than just one function, more than just be a visual piece, but actually work in that commercial setting. So we started playing with perforated metal as a material, and we loved how many things that could accommodate, like airflow, water flow for the fire suppression systems, light transmission.
Has really good acoustic properties. You can put felt pads on top, and the idea was that we could create this really flexible system that can become lighting, become an acoustical sound damping thing, it could just become a purely aesthetic thing. But what we did is we made the system flexible enough where if it becomes a system that we give to architects as a tool to design with, because I feel like a lot of architects, once they get into the profession of practicing, you have a very limited toolbox to create with from certain palettes when you're working on ceilings or even walls. And if you can give them a flexible tool to create where they can create their own lighting arrangements, they can create their own sound dampening arrays in really unique ways. So the idea was really create a system that's flexible that gives the power of design back to designers.
The shape, this kind of triad shape is based on a mathematical principle. It's really fun because it's actually in a group. When all these little parts are making up one whole, it's one of the most flexible shapes in the world. This particular project used 500 or so of these propellers, and they kind of weave through the space.
Or you can get a random displacement of light, or one can become a chandelier fully lit that drops out of the ceiling over tables. So you get this seamless flow where ceiling panel becomes light becomes ceiling panel, and it just kind of all blends together.
And the whole system works with the building's daylight system, which is constantly monitoring the sidewalks and the outside light coming into the space. And so it's this kind of a smart system working with the building's brain. This will dim and glow as needed, kind of auto-efficient, whatever it does to itself. But it's actually really cool. And there are probably 6 or 7 areas in this space where instead of being part of the ceiling system, these panels drop and become independent chandeliers over particular seating areas, etc.
And this is one of our latest projects that we're just won with a commission to do public art for the market. So the market is this kind of core anchor in Seattle, and they're going through their first expansion really ever in 100 years. And they had an open call to activate this plaza. They wanted a new piece of iconic art. So we're like, oh, sure, that'd be fun, let's do it. So we decided to spin for it, and we ended up winning it. And we're in the process now of, going through all the bureaucratic hoops that have to go through on these types of projects. And then starting fabrication on how to figure this out. So the idea was on this new terrace that overlooks one of the most beautiful views in the city, out to the nature. How do you reflect the nature, but how do you have this strong anchoring point for place and become this place for people to hang out and kind of say you've arrived, you've been here. So the idea was that you create this bench that once you're looking out to the mountains, you get the reflection of the city, and then once you're looking to the city, you get the reflections of the mountains and the sky, so it becomes this mirage. So it's kind of a functional art piece. That's our process, script that we made. And there's one more slide. So this is something John and I used ever since the beginning to make sure that we are approaching our projects in the right place and let the beauty love do what we do. Ruby was a 13th century, I believe, Parisian poet, and it just helps us make sure that we are actually doing what we love to do, because that's why we're doing it. So this is kind of on us. And then there's a couple videos, but one is really short, one is like 2 or 3 minutes. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. I think the people closest to the computer might, but if you can't, we can just ask questions. Yeah, so we this was going to be a funny thing. So we got asked to do this weird thing with the BMW i8, or sorry, i3. But they ended up giving us a video about ourselves that was about our process, which is why we did it, which is this video, but I don't think you'll be able to hear it. So I guess we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, this kind of gets into more about the process and basically just our nitty-gritty approach to how the business has grown over the course of 6 or 7 years, and a little bit about where the future is. And so if you have any questions about that, we can let it play in the background. Don't be shy.
Your work is beautiful. It's not inspiring, and I hope my students enjoy watching it. But I'm wondering, beyond that moving forward, when you get frustrated as a block, do you have a technique or a methodology that takes over the hump?
That's a good question. Just once you fall down, get back up. There's so many things that we run into that we just can't possibly anticipate. And there's a lot of times you feel like throwing in the towel and you feel like giving up, but I think you really have to, I think the trick is focusing on what you actually really enjoy doing and why you're doing it, and that reminds you to keep trying, keep exploring, keep learning. And for us, curiosity is always a big thing, so the second we get curious about a process or an idea or a material, we just want to explore it and play with it. So literally, I think it's just being curious about everything. And just kind of picking up a book, being curious about that, or say you're interested in a particular thing, just dive into it and see what happens. So let curiosity drive you.
You have a lot of great curious people.
Yeah, I think another really important aspect of that is, we founded this company on a certain set of core values. We love using our hands and just being creative, but trying to, if we're going to do it, we should try to be good stewards and responsible designers, and that's basically all it comes down to, is having fun and being responsible about it. And some of the biggest challenges that have popped up are, how do you scale this stuff up to a much bigger level but keep those core values intact? And so those have been a lot of the moments where it's like, well, we're not going to hire 100 people and lose the studio environment, but maybe we can expand production and produce them locally in Europe for Europe, which we've done by starting an Amsterdam studio, and keep production, even though it's more expensive, we can keep production in Seattle for North America. It makes sense. It provides jobs and people like to do it. And then even in Amsterdam, we've been able to partner with social works programs that their government has in place. So we can even benefit, bigger causes than just employing somebody, but actually take a closer look at what you're doing and why you're doing it, because there's always an answer out there. There almost always is, and it usually works itself out as long as you don't take your side of it.
So obviously you focus a lot on product design and everything, but at the same time, the garage, I'm hearing either short films or the film kind of things. So do you foresee yourself doing more architectural projects that kind of showcase your other work, or would you see yourself doing?
The products allow us to curate the architecture stuff, so we love doing architecture, and we have a couple other projects that we're working on right now, but we don't, to us, John and I both have been able to work on several different scales and types, and we've done larger commercial firms, we've done smaller residential firms, and through that process we've kind of tailored it to what we really like to work on together. And the architecture process can be a really, really long process, 3 to 4 years before you can actually touch something. So we want to enjoy that process because it is so long. So we want to do that with the right people and the right team. So we use the products and the custom installations as a way to curate those. When we got the right mix and ingredients together, we we can really dive into those and create these really special moments. Because then that allows us to be artistic in the architecture world, and that we can treat that as a special place for us. Because I think we both were in this spot where we were in places just churning out buildings, and I kind of lost the soul and all that, and I'm a hopeless romantic. I love to fall in love with buildings and love to fall in love with the things that I love. And that's a way I can preserve that to be special. I think that's what we're trying to do.
How did you guys break into the huge corporate market? You guys are pretty young and small office, and you guys find any like particular challenges with working with such large entities?
Yes.
Grow beard, look older. That's why I haven't shaved. We got lucky, but truthfully what we did learn in architecture was that world. We knew the architecture world, and we knew what it took to get things specified in projects. We knew how those companies work, so we spoke the same language. So we used that as a resource to talk. And at the time when we were just starting out with our lights, all of our friends were practicing architects, so I would pack a bag of lights, get on an airplane, go to presentations at firms for people I knew, and I would just try to get them in projects.
So you guys were doing like lunch and learns at friends' offices and like marketing yourselves to them?
Yeah. Yeah, at the time, JetBlue had this really crazy all-you-can-jet. This was, I think, in 2009, something like that. They had these specials. It was 1 month for $500 and as much as you could fly. So I packed a bag, and I called all my friends, and I grabbed a couple lights, and I did the best I could do in the month. And that's how it happened. And it's just showing up, too. It's like you create your own serendipity. I firmly believe that. If you just go, just like walk through a door, just go to a trade show, whatever, just talk about your ideas, you'll create your own opportunities. And if you just sit there and you don't talk about them, they won't come to you. So you really have to go actively seek them. So I think you can really create your own chances of possibility just by showing up to something.
One of my favorite examples is a friend, I think in 2008, a friend said, don't just sit here and take your lights to this huge trade show in New York, just do it. And so we thought, okay, cool, we saved up money, bought plane tickets, threw a few lights over our shoulder, and showed up in New York at this huge trade show. And we're kind of the two guys from Seattle in jeans, totally out of place, surrounded by huge installations by whoever, DuPont, Philips, and all these huge companies. And it worked. It actually worked. People came by and started saying, well, are they UL listed? What type of these can I use in commercial projects? Stuff we didn't know the answer to yet. And we just kept nodding our head and then flew back to Seattle and immediately figured out all those questions. And said, okay, we're going back next year, but we're going to know the answer to everything.
How common is it for you guys to be working on a project process?
What was that?
How common is it for you guys to be working on a project process, that idea, that the process is that they do?
Constant. The question was, how common is it for a project to be set on an idea or a design and have it be completely altered in the middle of the process? Did I get that right? And yeah, I think the answer is always. I think it's a constant exploration. I don't even remember how many versions of the garage existed.
We had the stupidest ideas up front, but they all led to the right solution. And it was just keep trying, and then finally one clicked. But it was through that process of going through that. I think you have to kind of keep it open-ended. But I think what really helps us on a project is coming up with a theme from the beginning and using that as a rail. Because sometimes when you have open-ended constraints, it's really hard to be creative because possibilities are endless. So if you limit your possibilities, like give yourself a constraint, then you can create more ideas from that. So we try to create some constraint for ourselves by either a theme or something that we can use to keep driving one idea constantly through a project so that it becomes cohesive and becomes a whole message. Because I think the hardest part is starting something that could be so open-ended. And I think you really need to focus and by limiting your focus, you create so many opportunities.
What do you think has been the most rewarding part of your experiences of like starting out
The people we get to work with, first and foremost. We have the most amazing team, and we're not all architects, or maybe we come from industrial design, architectural design, landscape, urban planning, sculpture, and more. So that's been amazing, but also, you know, there's one thing they didn't teach us in architecture school, and that's how to run a business. They never even touched on that at our school. And so that was just from the ground up. That was a complete learning experience. And I think in hindsight, I'm almost thankful for that, because we kind of did things our own way and learned as we went, weren't afraid to just take a stab at something without having a prim and proper, you know, outline of how we were going to do it. So not being shy of that process, and not being shy of just exploring how you can maybe do it your own way. We were told countless times, you know, that our downfall early on might be that we're not focusing on only architecture or only products or only furniture. And, you know, that's actually what I'm most thankful for, and the most fun part of it is the diversity.
When you get to a design background is really amazing, because you can, it's a problem solving where you get to creatively solve problems every day. And starting a business is a problem, and you have to solve it. So we had to solve that in a creative way. Branding that was a problem, we had to solve that in a creative way. But we were able to use our skills from being in design school to do those, which was what's been fun for us. We approached them all as these creative things that we need to solve. But to answer your question, yeah, it's the people that we've met and that we work with. I really feel fortunate to get some pretty cool friends now all over the world. Get to my friends, which is awesome.
Can you tell yourself to stay inspired when you're working and find out that you actually think you're doing before you do?
That's happened. So the question was when you're halfway through a design process or working on a project, you find out that the exact same thing has already been done before. How do you stay inspired or get past that? That's, you know, there are a lot of things we've done where we just have to move on. That's happened. A lot of things we spent a lot of time on just didn't work in the end, and you just move on. But you know, no matter what, there's always something you can take away from that. You know, you always learn something in the process. And the funny thing is it may be 6 or 7 years later, but something you learn from one of those failures will be the most important part, or the whole idea of something brand new years later. It always seems to come full circle.
I imagine starting a company from scratch is not only really difficult, but very nerve-wracking. And I wanted to know, like, at what point did you kind of realize that it was going to be legitimate, and then that you can continue it, and knew that it was going to work out, and what led up to that sort of that point, if it would?
That's a good question. We started, you know, officially on paper, we started Graypants probably in 2006 as a creative project together, if not a little bit earlier, but on paper it was 2008, January 1st, which is pretty much just in time for the economy to fully tank and no buildings to be built or designed. And that was actually, you know, we had day jobs at the time, and we were going home and doing this as a creative endeavor in the evenings, just spending our time on it. But at some point, you know, it was a few of those fun things, like the first trade show, and that's when we kind of started to take it really seriously. We've always wanted to do this since college, we knew that. But when the economy tanked, and at some point, Seth's job went away first, and we just kind of looked at each other and agreed, like, this is our chance. We're going to do it right now as our chance. Let's see what happens. Let's focus on it.
Yeah, but I can't think of a really definitive moment besides actually just losing your job and you're like, I have to try this. But you're still not sure if it's going to work out. And I think even now, it's still, I mean, it feels real, but at the same time, it's sort of, you're still never really sure. So you can still keep working really hard. But yeah, I guess once you have people working for you and you want to help them too, so it motivates us to stay with this. So the question was, how do we use different mediums do we use it in the creative process, or do we use it in the end marketing strategy? We use it for both. We just love to document our process along the way, just because the process to us is the fun part, and it's how you arrive to what your solution is, or what one of your solutions will be. So it's really just having fun with that process. That's another problem that we get to solve in that way. But yeah.
One last question? How much of the products get manufactured in-house?
Like, is there a point at which you send out somewhere to get built, or do you do the
Yeah, that's been an adventure for us. We felt really strongly up front that we were going to continue to make things ourselves and not just I mean, certainly we never were interested in outsourcing it overseas or something that didn't make sense. We really embraced this kind of local studio atmosphere, and we wanted to grow that and take advantage of it. We always had an idea with the scrap lights. They were the first thing we needed to figure out how to grow, was this cardboard lamp. And cardboard is everywhere. So we have this wonderful idea where, why can't you just find somebody everywhere to make the lights and sell them locally to their little community? And it's not quite that easy, but we were able to figure it out in Europe. The first place we started getting orders internationally were from Europe, Holland and Denmark and places like that. And so we decided we should start an office there and at least have production in Europe for Europe and maintain production in Seattle for the US. And it's kind of grown organically like that. You know, we're never, and right now, those are the two places that scrap lights are made, and if it's ordered in North America, we will make it in Seattle. And now Eastern Washington, which we also partnered with, kind of a creative small town over there. And if it's ordered in Europe or elsewhere internationally, it'll be made in Holland. And just to take it a step further, I think that's why, you know, we knew it wasn't realistic to make them in every small city in the world. But if we are going to make a lot of scrap lights in Holland, how can we do it responsibly and just keep those values intact? And that's how we were able to partner up with social works programs and really work with people that need a good job and love doing it and want craft-based work. And their government's very responsible about that stuff, and it's been a huge honor for us to even just to have the option of benefiting, you know, people with slight disabilities, or whether it's physical or autism or whatever. It's really important to us to keep that going and keep pursuing bigger ideas like that. You're putting a lot of effort into it, so you may as well do it in an area that's helping other people somehow.
In the beginning, we never wanted to be a manufacturer, but we found ourselves being a manufacturer, and we weren't being creative anymore, or we were burdened by manufacturing. So now we've been trying to solve the problem of, well, we don't want to be a manufacturer, we want to be designers. But we couldn't, the trick was, it's kind of a catch-22, we couldn't go to manufacturers because we couldn't give them a huge quantity of orders up front. So basically we kept getting turned away. So we couldn't guarantee people a minimum on an order, and we didn't have enough, we couldn't convince them to take it on. So we had to take that on ourselves. And then as we've grown that organically over the years, now we have enough to go to people like, listen, we can give you some minimum order guarantees. So now it's set us up to leverage and negotiate more, but in the beginning it was impossible. And all the new stuff that we coming up with, it's hard to do that because we don't have the guaranteed minimums on some things. We're trying to figure out how that all gets incorporated to the process. And it's been an interesting shift this past year because we, like John mentioned, we partnered with we used to do all the fabrication in our studio, and then 3 years ago we set up the entity in Holland, which allowed us to have distribution in 55 countries. And then we still do production in Seattle for US and Canada. But the trick with that was we were still making everything in our studio. And then we finally were able to find the right person to partner with out in Eastern Washington so that we can have half of the studio is design and half of the studio is research development and custom projects. And that's really where we want to be. So we're in that shifting moment right now. But it's taken us 7 years to get there. It's been a long time to try to shift that just because of the manufacturing orders, and especially in Seattle, a lot of the companies work with Boeing. Boeing can guarantee them enormous quantities, so they want to talk to you. So we've learned a lot on how to try to negotiate with manufacturing entities, which is it's actually really difficult. That's probably the trickiest part is ideas are fine, it's just how do you make them in scale in multiple times, that's the tricky part. And then to do that in a quality of what you want. But to us, design has become more about storytelling. So the whole process is stories, and we want to create a really strong story, even in manufacturing, around what we're doing, because we think it's just so easy to come through it. So to us, really good design makes really good decisions.
Thank you guys very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much. One more time, can we hear these guys? Brittany has something to say.
So I wanted to let you all know that Landscape Architecture has another lecture coming up this Wednesday as part of our department lecture series, but it's actually an architecture lecture. A local architect named Lisa Little of the firm Vertebrae will be speaking, and I think if you enjoyed this talk, all of you will enjoy that one. That's in Building 7. Please join us Wednesday at noon. And for those of my classes, $4.99, and as well as Wilcox's graphics class that are